Lakuta Sichis Chelek Chaf, the Sicha for Parashas Noach, Sicha Beis, Leili Nishmas Reb Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. We are also learning L'Schus, our dear friend Yosef Shlema Ben Nisha, for a Refuah Shlema Ukreva. This is a very, very fascinating Sicha. One of the fascinating parts is, as mentioned at the end of the Sicha, its source is Mimichtevei Sivan Tavshim Emalef, a series of correspondence between the Rebbe and Rabbi Levi Goldstein, then a Rabbi, a teacher at Lubavitcher Yeshiva, and later Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin, the librarian at the Rebbe's library. And the correspondence back and forth turns into the Sicha as we learn it, and it explores the age of Noach, and more broadly, how we count the years that are mentioned in the Torah. And it leads to a fascinating lesson in our emunah, in our faith, in the veracity of Torah, and what it tells us about our connection with the emes, the authenticity and the truth of Torah. Very, very fascinating discussion and a very beautiful lesson at the end. Sif Aleph. Afin Pasik v'Noach ben sheish me'es shana v'hamabul hoya mayim al haaretz. The Pasik says in this week's parsha that Noach was 600 years old, and the Mabul came was water upon the earth. Shteten Medrash, the Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah says, as Shnas HaMabul eino oile min haminyan, that when counting the years of Noach, the year of the Mabul is not included in the tally. Das heißt, die Mefarshim sagen, as the Mefarshim explain, as der Mabul Yar wird nicht zugerechnet l'shneso shel Noach. The Mabul was approximately a year from when it began until everything dried up. That year is not counted in the years of Noach, Vimir Zen, as we will see. When the Eibishter counts the years of Noach, as we will see in a moment, it tells us that Noach lived 950 years. It does not include the Mabul year. You find you will find, if you calculate it, that Noach lived, if you include the Mabul year, 951 years. Shekenu Omer, as it says, Noach ben sheish me'es shana v'hamabul hoya. Noach was 600 years old, and the Mabul was mashma she'hamabul hoya la'achar sheish me'es shana, implying that the Mabul began after Noach turned 600 years old, completing 600 years. Dichsiv, as it says, "Vayi be'achas v'sheish me'es shana v'gomer charvu hamayim," that when Noach was 601 years old, the water dried up, and the Mabul had started a year before. So he was 600 when the Mabul started. He was 601 when the Mabul finished. Chesiv, and it says, "Vayechi Noach achar haMabul shleish me'es gomer v'chamishim shana," that Noach lived after the Mabul for another 350 years. Uchesiv, and it says, that all of the years of Noach cumulatively, that Noach was alive on this earth, was 950 years. So you have 600 before the Mabul, 1 year of the Mabul, 350 after the Mabul is a total of 951. So the pasuk should have said that Noach lived for 951 years. Alma, from this we conclude that the year of the Mabul is not included in the number of his years. And the Medrash explains the reason. Why would you all of a sudden skip a year of the man's life? So because it was such a difficult year, a year of tzara for the world and for him, therefore it doesn't count as a year. It's as if the year didn't exist. We say 950, 600 before the Mabul, 350 after the Mabul, and the year of the Mabul doesn't count. So that's what the Medrash tells us on this pasuk. Since it says the Noach was 600 years old when the Mabul began, it must mean and it says that Noach lived for 950 years, it must mean that the year of the Mabul is not counted in the years of that Noach lived on this earth. So now the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe is going to ask, why does Rashi not address this? Seemingly a glaring contradiction in the Psukim. We discussed many times as their fun was Rashi Zok Bekam Mekaymis. Because we find in certain cases that Rashi says the expression "I don't know" is muchach and yet nordvus is farana shverikait in psutei shel mikra. So this makes it clear that whenever there is a question in psutei shel mikra, in the basic understanding of the psukim, vertes bavorent in Pirush Rashi addresses it in his commentary. Und dort wo schreibt nit kein Pirush und sagt nit leyadaiti. So if Rashi doesn't give an explanation, nor does he bring the fact that I don't know, or something implying that Rashi doesn't know the answer, it must mean that it's not a question. Either Rashi has to explain it, or Rashi has to address it and say, I don't know. But if Rashi doesn't do either of those, he's telling us that this is a self-understood matter. Other from the pasuk gufa, either the pasuk itself answers its own question, other from the ksuvim, or from the previous psukim or the previous rashis that have been brought previously, we already could know the answer to this question. So now that we understand the rule of Rashi, that whenever Rashi has a question, he addresses it either by giving the answer or saying he doesn't know. And if he doesn't do so, clearly he believes there's no question. According to this, we have to understand the fact that the total sum, the sum total of Noach's years as they're brought in the pasuk, is not consistent with the number of years from before the Mabul and after the Mabul. Which compels the Medrash to say that the Mabul is not being the Mabul year is not being included in the number, is a glaring contradiction in the simple meaning of the psukim. And Rashi does not address it. So why is it that Rashi does not address this glaring contradiction that on the one hand we see that Noach lived for 951 years, and on the other hand the pasuk says 950? You can say that Rashi holds that according to the simple understanding of the psukim, like that will go like the Medrash, that the year of the Mabul is not being included in the number. Because Adrabah, das ist a Chiddush Gadol, und Rashi wollte es gedacht schreiben befehlish. This is a very novel approach, which had Rashi believed that this was the meaning, Rashi would have had to say so explicitly. Ubifrat, as in dem Cheshbon Prati, wird Shnas Mabul yagerechnet in der Torah. Especially since when we go into the details of Noach's life, we are including the year of the Mabul. Canal, as we mentioned earlier, that first there's a pasuk that says that the Mabul began in the 600th year of Noach's life. And then it says that when Noach was 601, the water dried. So we are referencing Noach's age and adding a year from 600 to 601 when talking about the Mabul. So it's only later when we get to the total of 950 that all of a sudden we're not including the year of the Mabul. So if in the Pashtus Aksuvim later on we do reference Noach's life in reference to the Mabul, then if Rashi holds that Shnas Mabul is not part of the count, then Rashi has to say so clearly, and he doesn't. So we're back to our original question. In that case, why does Rashi not address this glaring contradiction in the Psuk? And Sif Beis, the Rebbe is going to answer the question by saying that when we say that Noach was 600 years old when the Mabul began, we don't mean that he had completed 600 years. We mean that he was in his 600th year, which could even be in the beginning. He was 599. And according to this, it'll all add up properly. In Pasuk steht, B'shnas sheish me'yashana l'chaye Noach, in the 600th year of Noach's life, Nifku kol ma'inois tohim rabba, the fountains of the underground, they burst forth, and the Mabul began. Now notice, in the beginning of the Sikha, we quoted the pasuk, Noach ben sheish me'yashana, Noach was 600 years old. Here the Rebbe brings a different pasuk that says Bishnas, in Bishnas sheish me'yashana, in the 600th year. So from was der Pirush Apashas from Bishnas. Very simply speaking, when you say in the 600th year, is in mitten dem Jahr. It means in the middle of the 600th year. Umele came and learn as Bishnas Sheish Meis Gomer. Nivku Gomer is going to Tchilas Hashana. It could even be in the beginning of the 600th year. Das heißt, as reingehen dik in Jahr 600 Lachai Noach, upon entering into the 600th year of Noach's life, when there is alt given Tov Kuf Tzadik Teshana mit Amiktzes, when he was 599 years old and a bit. Hat sich angegeben der Mabel. That's when the Mabel began. So, from the pasuk Bishnas, it seems very obvious that the Mabel began in the year that Noach, in the 600th year of Noach, which means to say right after and possibly right after he turned 599. And since that pasuk it specifies that it was in the 600th year, das machriach zu sagen, als euch das, was steht, v'neach ben sheish meiah shana v'mabel hoya mayim al haaretz. This compels us to say that even when it says in the other pasuk that Noach was 600, meant when there is a rain in the year 600. It means that when Noach entered into his 600th year, because literally ben sheish meiah means he's already 600 years. But from the fact that the other pasuk says Bishnas, this tells us that when it says V'noyach ben sheish me'eshana, it means in the 600th year. Oder, there's another way to explain this. As meint kediyuk lashon hakasuv v'hamabul hoya, we could focus on the nuance in the pasuk. The mabul was lashon avar in past tense. As V'noyach is given a ben sheish me'eshana, that when Noach turned 600 years old, is their mabul shoin given from the year. The mabul already was, already began. So you have the pasuk Bishnas that tells us that the Mabul began when Noach was in his 600th year. Then it says Noach ben sheish me'ah shana. So either it means that it began when Noach went into his 600th year, or it means that when Noach turned 600, the Mabul already was already in the middle of it. In the pasuk the same thing we would do with the pasuk that says that when Noach was 601, the water dried. Meint es nicht volle 601 Jahr, nor in onneib 601. It doesn't mean that Noach completed 601 years. It means in the beginning of the 601st year. Das heißt 600 mit amiktzes, which means 600 and a bit. So now let's add this up. When Noach turned 599 and a little bit, the Mabul began. When Noach turned 600 and a little bit, then the Mabul ended. Now when we get to the sum total of Noach's years, so if you now add 350, Noach is now 950 and a little bit. But when the Torah gives the numbers, it rounds it up to the full number. Does not count a little bit of the year as a full year. 950 shana. Which means that Noach's age, when he passed away, was 950. 600 umixes bis la'achrei Mabul. It was 600 and a bit until the Mabul ended. And 350 noch in Mabul, and another 350 after the Mabul, which totals 950 and a bit. We don't count the bit because we rounded up to the closest big number, which is 950, and that's why it says 950, and it all adds up very beautifully. The Mabul began when Noach was 599 after he entered into his 600th year. The Mabul ended when Noach had just entered into his 601st year. 350 years later, which is 950 and a bit, Noach passes away. The Torah gives us the round number. Noach passed away at 950. And this answers the question why Rashi doesn't bring anything. Because it's very obvious, from the word Bishnas, Sheish Me'eshana, it's clear that the Mabul did not begin after Noach turned 600, it began after Noach turned 599 years old. Their beard is aber lecher and it must speak. This explanation is problematic. The Rabbi Sif Gimel is going to bring in another Rashi about the age of Mesushelach, that's seemingly going to necessitate that we count 600 full years of Noach, which is going to contradict what we just said, that Noach was 599. And let's see how this goes. The pasuk says that Hashem said to Noach, the Mabul is beginning in 7 more days. So Rashi says those 7 days were the 7 days of Shiva, the 7 days of mourning after the passing of Mesushelach. And Rashi explains, the Eibishter respected Mr. Shalach, and therefore he waited the 7 days. He waited till after Mr. Shalach passed away in order to begin the Mabul. And then Rashi says, Tzevach HaShev, go and calculate. Shneisa Shom Mr. Shalach, the years of Mr. Shalach, the age at which he passed away. V'timtza Shem Kolim, B'shnas Tafrei Shana L'chayin Noach, and you will find that the end, that Mr. Shalach's years end when Noach turns 600, which is the time when the Mabul is about to begin. But the Cheshbon is, and this is how the calculation plays itself out. Mr. Shalach had gilept Shameis v'shishim v'teisha shana. Mr. Shalach lived 969 years. When a Yais as Mr. Shalach is alt given kuf pei zayin shana k'shahel des lemach. Mr. Shalach was 187 years old when Lemech was born. Lemech his son. When Lemech is alt given Kuf Pei Beishana Kshahel Des Noach, and then Lemech was 182 years old when Lemech gave birth, or Lemech fathered Noach. Noach was his son. Zusammen Shin Samach Tes Shana, this adds up to 369 years. Kumtuis Ashneso Shem Mr. Shalach, which means that Mr. Shalach's total of years, which was Kuf Samach Tes Shana, 969 years. Calling Bishnas Taf Reish L'chayin Noach, the end when Noach turned 600, because Taf Reish 600 and Shis Samach Tes and 369, which is the age of Mr. Shalach when Noach was born, is Kuf Samach Tes is 969. It adds up beautifully. Mr. Shalach was 187 when he gave birth to Lemech. Then Lemech was 182 when Noach was born, which means that Mr. Shalach was 369 years old when Noach was born. Noach is his grandson. And then plus 600 is 969. So when Noach turns 600, Mr. Shalach turns 969, and that's when he passes away. But since you're telling me that the passing of Mr. Shalach was before the Mabul, so this means that when the Pasuk says that at 600 years, in the 600th year of Noach's life, the water from the underground burst forth, it has to mean after Noach turned 600. Because otherwise you don't have 969 for Mr. Shalach. So we started saying that Noach was 599. If Noach is 599, then Mr. Shalach is 968, not 969. And that the Cheshbon of Rashi doesn't fit. Pashas woman does it can't fit him. So the Rebbe says, let's answer like this. When the Torah gives us numbers, ages, at which each of these fathers were when their sons were born. It doesn't mean that the day he turned 187, that's the day that he had a baby. Because according to that, it would play out as Sheis and Enish and the Derish Lachareim. By them in the state that Sheis, which is Adam's son, and then Enish his son, and then all the generations by whom the Chumash, the Parashas Bereshis tells us that they lived X amount of years, and then they had a child. If it means that when they turned that age, that's when they had the baby, that means that each one is being born on their father's birthday. But which means they were all born on the same day as their father, until Adam Rishon, who we know is born on Rosh Hashanah, and then it would mean that every single person of these generations were born on Rosh Hashanah, on the same birthday as their father, which doesn't make any sense because it doesn't say that anywhere. So it doesn't mean that every single person gave birth or their child was born on the day of their birthday. Nor does mean, what does it mean? As noch dem, wie sie haben gehad misper Jahren. After they reach this number of years, is in Meshach von dem Jahr lidu. In the course of the year, they had a baby. So let's say when Mr. Shalach was 187, he gave birth to Lemech. It doesn't mean on the day that he turned 187. It means after he turned 187, sometime during the course of the next year, he had a child. So now that will mean As we bald die Kuf bei Zayin Shana von Misushalach. Bei Lides Lemech und die Kuf bei Shana von Lemech bei Lides Neach. Zayne mit Shirayim. Since the 187 years that Misushalach was when Lemech was born, and the 182 years that Lemech was when Noach was born, Zayne mit Shirayim have remainders, have a little bit more time after the year was completed. Is Betziru von die Shirayim or Shiyarim. Mit der Mikzes von Shnas Tofrei Shana L'Chayim Noach. So now if you take the few extra months that after Misushalach turned 187, and the few extra months after Lemech turned 182, and the few months as an example, after Noach turned 599, kum zusammen uis a ganze Jahr, it will accumulate to an entire year, which will complete the years of Misushalach. So we can still say that Noach was 599. In that case, how do you reach 969 for Misushalach? Because you have 187 plus 182 plus 599 plus 3 bits of a year, which accumulate to approximately a year, and your total is 969. So we could still say that Noach was 599 and just entered into his 600th year when the Mabul began, and at the same time, it doesn't contradict the fact that Misushalach was 969 years old when he passed away right before the Mabul began. But if that's the case, we have another question. With regards to the sin of the Deir Haflaga is the generation that tried building a tower to reach the heavens. So Rashi says in the second Pirush of Rashi, Amru, they said, Achas le'elef v'taf reish nun vav shanim. Every 1,656 years, it's the number of years between the creation of the world and the Mabul. Harakia mismoitet, the heavens crumble, or they shake. Kishem sha'asa b'mei Mabul, just like it happened in the time of the Mabul. And therefore they said, we have to build this tower to hold up the heavens shouldn't fall. Was der Chesben von Elef etaf reish nun vav shanim. How did they get to the number 1,656? Is der Sachakel von die Shnois Hayledes von die Oisgerech and the Deiris Matmanach. If you count up how many years there were for all the people that were born and when they gave birth, say Noach was 0, but then when Noach turned 130, he gave birth to Shes. And when Shes was a certain X amount of years, he gave birth to Enosh. When you count up all these years, it'll total 1,656, and therefore at this point, the Deir Haflaga says we have to quickly build a tower to hold up the world, to hold up the heavens. As in the Misperei Hashanim Zayin Dashirayim was very nit gerechnet. But if you're going to say, as we just said in the beginning of this seif, that every time they gives us a number, say no, Adam was 130, it means 130 plus. There's a remainder that tuiskumin. Then this will lead to add up as by Yedin for the Asara Deiris Adan Eid for Agivissens man, that each of these 10 generations from Adam till Noach has a remainder. Tag Vachen Chadashim, either extra days or extra weeks or extra months. Was wird nicht gerechnet Misper HaKlali von Dishanim, which is not counted in the number of years. And if that's the case, then it's logical to say, as that during these 10 generations, where people lived long lives, that all of the remainders will accumulate to at least a year. And now the total is not 1,656, nor more than that. Either 1,657 or possibly even more. If you think about it, if for 10 generations, let's say each one had an average of 2 months after their birthday, that's 20 months, it's almost 2 years. So the whole chesbon of 1,656 doesn't work anymore. As soon as we've established in the beginning of this seif that when it gives us an age, when it says Misushalach was 187, when Lemech was born, it means 187 plus. Then if all of these 10 generations have a plus, then you have more than a year. And the number is not 1,656. So Sif Dal, the Rebbe offers a very, very fascinating suggestion, which the Rebbe is going to refute. As der Sachakel Cheshbon von 11 Tafresh Nun Vav Shanim, that the total number of 1656 is Val Shneisa Anashim Menuyin Leminyan Shneis Eilam, because the age of the people is being counted by the years of the world. Rashi in Parshas Kisisa, as Rashi says in Kisisa, Rashi over there is talking about the different censuses that took place when Moshe counted the Yidden. And Rashi makes a cheshbon that one census was right after Yom Kippur, another census was in Aleph Iyar. So in a sense, it wasn't. If you're counting from Tishrei, it was in the same year. If you're counting from Nisan, it was in 2 separate years, because Nisan started a new year, and then there was another census in Iyar. So Rashi says that there's sometimes that we count the years by Shnois Olam, by the years of the world. For example, right now we're in 5,785. So even though someone might have a birthday in the middle of the year, so his year begins in the middle of the year, but when we count the years in the Torah, we're counting the years of the world. And therefore, it doesn't matter if there was extra. Das heißt, as man zählt, as Sachakel von Shneis Anashim, he says, nicht leit zeire Jahren or leit Shneis Eilam. When we count the total of a person's years, we're not going according to their personal years, but rather to the years that went on in the world. And therefore, even if there's a remainder and there's another remainder, it won't change the fact that it's still whatever year it was, the 130th year from creation, or it's 267 years from creation, whatever it is. So if you're counting by the world doesn't have remainders. The world starts every year. Tishrei starts a new year, and therefore, if we're going to sort of round off the person's years to Shnois Olam, then the remainder doesn't matter. So maybe we could explain that that's why we're still at 1656, because regardless of the fact that there were remainders, the Torah doesn't count them, because the Torah is comparing them to the years of the world, and therefore, when you count up all those numbers, it adds up to 1656, and the number is perfect. As the Bardecha Gadol Tzelain, as Rashi nemta das dem Pirush Parshas Seinu. Even though Rashi refers to this in Parshas Kisisa with regards to the census, nevertheless, it's very difficult to say that this is the Pirush that Rashi is following in this parsha. Nit schreiben das befeidet, because he doesn't write it clearly. According to Pshat, it's a big chiddush if you say so-and-so was 187 years old, to say that he wasn't actually 187, but there were just world years, 187 world years that this person age rounds off to, is a big chiddush. As when Torah rechent, Shneis Chaya von Ein mentioned that if Torah is listing the age of an individual, we don't mean how many years he lived, we mean the years of the world, how many world years he was alive. So it's a Deicha Gadol. If a person lived 187 and a half years, but his birthday was before Tishrei, then it's counted 187. So when we say 187, we mean according to the Shnois Olam, says the Rebbe, that's a Deicha to say that, because we're talking about an individual, we're not talking about the world. And had Rashi believed that was the Pshat, Rashi would have said so. So we're back to our question. If we're not counting Shnois Olam, then we're counting the individual person's life. If we're counting the individual person's life, then when it says 187, it means 187 and a half possibly. And if you accumulate all the extras, you have more than a year. And we don't have Tafresh Nun Vav Shana. But we have to say that there are extra years, that there's extras, because otherwise Mr. Chelek doesn't make it to 969. Because if Chelek makes it to 969, that means Noach was 600. So if Noach was 599, the only way that Mr. Chelek gets to 969 is if you count the remainders. But if you count the remainders, then you have more than 1656 with regards to the years that the cheshbon was made by the Der Haflaga. So what do we do now? So the Rebbe gives another explanation here. In Derech HaPshat, when Torah sagt, as Plainis alt kach v'kach yoren, according to Pshat, if Torah says that a person was is X amount of years old, not when he says clearly, today I turned 120, today it's my birthday, today I became 120 years old, as Moshe says on his last day on this earth. So that obviously is clear that is the day that he was born. That is the day that he became 120. But if the Torah doesn't say it like that, but says generally so and so is X amount of years old, it means an approximate number. Meglich elter aber weniger wie mit a halb Jahr. He could be older up to 6 months. Oder inger mit a zazman, or younger than that by 6 months. So you say a person's 187, he could be 186 and a half. He could be 187 and a half. Because probably you're going to round it off to the closest whole year. So if it's less than a half a year away from 187, we'll call it 187, even if he's 186 in 7 months, or even if he's 187 in 5 months, we'll call it 187. And if that's the case, in other words, not always is there a remainder. Not always when we say a certain amount of years do we mean that plus. We mean that plus or that minus. Now, it fits very well how we get to 1656. Was bei sie ist da Eide von Yom Mitzvah sein nicht rein im Misperashon Makasavitera, because now, just like there were certain generations in which there was extra, more time over the number of years, which were not included in the years that are written in the Torah. There are also those that didn't make it to that number, that there is a deficiency in the number that's not recognized in the Torah. It might say 187, and he might be 186 in 8 months. So what's going to happen is that the number is going to even out. In the 10 generations, there were some that there was a few extra months over the number given. Some there was a few less months than the number given. All in all, it'll even out to the number that it says. And it'll also equal up approximately with the years of the world, because when you have a little more here and a little less here, it'll even out. I mean, you can't have a person that's 187 years and in world years it's 192. It has to be somewhere within the same year. So if you're adding some months and you're taking away some months and you're meeting somewhere in the middle, it'll add up to the number of years that are in the Torah, which will also be consistent with Shnois Olam. So the Torah is counting the Shnois Olam, but more importantly, the Torah's numbers are pretty close to exact, and that's how we get to the number Taf Reish Nun Vav 1656. Aleph Taf Reish Nun Vav. So in other words, Noach was 599 and a bit when the Mabul started. He was 600 and a bit when the Mabul ended. He was 950 and a bit when he passed away, and the Torah rounds it off to 950, which works very nicely with what we just said, that the Torah rounds up the numbers. If Noach was 599, how does Mr. Shalach reach the 969? Because there must have been a few extra months in Mr. Shalach's life. When it says 187, he was 187 and a bit when Lamech was born. Lamech was 182 and a bit when Noach was born. Noach was 599 and a bit when the Mabul began, or when Mr. Shalach passed away. Those 3 bits will accumulate to a year. So now you have 969. And if you're going to say, if you're always going to add, how do you get to 1,656 for the year when the Mabul began? Because you don't always add. Sometimes you take off. So since sometimes you add, sometimes you take off, it rounds off exactly to Elef Taf Reish Nun Vav 1,656. And now all 3 questions that we asked are answered, and it all fits in so beautifully. And this, with numbers, you can't play games. Numbers is 1 + 1 is 2. And here the Rebbe shows us how the numbers, as they are in Torah, whether it's the number Noach's age, whether it's Mr. Shalach's age, whether it's the year of the Mabul and the years that we were taught and we were told in the Medrash or in Rashi or in Chumash, as they are, it all fits perfectly if you just are able to understand the Psukim. In Sifav, the Rebbe goes a little bit deeper. This explanation the Rebbe just gave in Sifei, the Rebbe takes it a step further, a little further away from Pshat, but nevertheless, it enhances even stronger our understanding of these numbers. We can explain this a little more. It's not so consistent with Pshat, but let us first introduce the following. Der Tam bepasst, was Teire rechnet uns bei Yadrin von der Deires, sein Gil, beim Geburt von sein Sohn. What is the reason that the Torah tells us the age of each of the fathers when their son was born? What's the relevance to know that Mesushelach was 187 when Lamech was born? Is Kedei men soll wissen, wenn die verschiedenen Muraish B'Teira passiert. It's not to know exactly how old Mesushelach was, but based on all of these numbers, we know when various events in the Torah occurred. We calculate according to these ages when things happened, when the Mabul happened, when Noach was around, when Noach came to, when Avram came, and so on and so forth. So we need these numbers for us to figure out when the various different events that are recorded in the Torah actually occurred. Valpiza, according to this, as the Misper Hashanim was state bekeshet le'ledes aderis, is beikar to lassen wissen dem gnei minyan l'shnei Eilam. So in that case, that means that the reason that they're telling us the numbers of the ages of the people is so we should know the numbers of world years. To know in what world year did the Mabul happen, for example. Kem and Zagin. So in that case, we could say, as the Misper HaKosef B'Teira, B'Yachas the Relada from the Misprati, when the Torah gives us a number with regards to the birth of a specific individual, can haben an Unterschied von Karget Zwei could be off, so to speak, by almost 2 years. Because Kimat dem ganzen Jahr wenn darf alle alt werden kach v'kach shana, almost an entire year when he's about to become that number number age. Und euch kimat dem ganzen Jahr nachdem wir schon geworden alter Misper Jahren, and almost a year after he became that age. In other words, in Sifei, the Rebbe said that when the Torah gives us a number, it means up to 6 months before that age or 6 months after that age. Then it'll be rounded up to that number. Now the Rebbe is saying more than that. The Rebbe is going to explain this very beautifully. That when the Torah gives us a number, it means up to 11 months prior to that and 11 months after that. L'dugma, Kuf Pei Zayin Shana in Pasuk Anal. When it tells us 187 years in the above mentioned Pasuk, Vayichim Mesushelach Sheva Ushmeinim Shana Ma'ashana Mesushelach lived for 187 years. Can maiden when halt betchila shnas haknisa to Kuf Pei Zayin. It could mean that he just began his 187th year. Kuf Pei Vav Shana Umiktzes, he's 186 and a bit. Und euch, wenn halt schein besima yitzia legari from Kuf Pei Zayin. It could also mean that he's about to leave the 187th year. Kuf Pei Ches Shana Chasar Miktzes, he's almost 188. When the Torah says 187, it could mean he just turned 186 and he just began his 187th year. Or it could mean he's been 187 for almost 12 months and he's about to turn 188. So there's almost 2 years that this number could mean. It could mean anywhere for 11 plus months before and 11 plus months after. Even though that means we don't know the exact time that the person was born. But that is not our point. We don't need to know exactly when the person was born. We need to know when the events happened. So wissen the Misper from the Shnei Shalom, we have to know the world years to be able to know when specific events happened. While the Sachakel from the Allah Misper Yeshanim is Masim to Min Shnei Shalom, because then when you say 187 and it means 186 or it means almost 188, it'll still add up pretty consistently with Shnei Shalom, with the world years. Chaser to Yasa Miktzes Shana, more or less within under a year, and you have the information that you need. You want to know when this happened. You don't need to know the exact day that it happened. You need to know within which year it happened. So as long as you know around which year this person was born, which means to say, you say it's 187, you know it was within the year before, the year after, you know which of Shnois Olam it is, which of the world years it is, and therefore you know the events that happened, and you've accomplished your goal. So therefore, because we understand now that the whole purpose is really to know the world years in order to know when the events happened, therefore if the pasuk says a number, it's not an exact number. It's a number that works within almost 2 years. And according to this helps us understand even more. When it says that Noach was 600, it means within a year of 600. When Shelek was 969, it means within a year of 969. And therefore, the fact that the numbers don't add up, it doesn't matter because it's close enough. Now, this is not al derech hapshat. So therefore, not kol kach al derech hapshat. So we have up until Sivav that Rabbi gave it al derech hapshat, and it works beautifully. We want to go levar oid baza. You could say that you don't mamish need, if you're not going a mamish derech hapshat, you could say that the whole purpose of the numbers is not to be exact, is to know when events happen. If that, without, we don't need exact numbers, and therefore the numbers are talking not exact. What is the deeper reason that the Torah wants us to know the years of the world, to know when these events happened? We'll understand by first introducing a medrash. As eine von die Meiles von Eden, welche Akilas Agoy hat gerechnet als a Tam of sein Otzenlies Geier. One of the reasons that Akilas, who was not Jewish, listed as a motivation for his desire to convert to Judaism, is HaKatan Shebehem Yedea, that even a simpleton, even the person on the lowest level, knows Kama Yesh Mishan Nivra Olam, how many years there are since the world was created. The Medrash, to give you more of the Medrash, Akilah said to Adrianus, the king, I want to convert and become a Jew. So Adrianus says, this is the nation that you want? I shamed them, I killed them. This is the lowest of all nations. This is, you want to get involved with them? What do you find in them that you want to become part of them? So Akilas answered, the simplest of them knows how Hashem created the world, what was created on day 1, what was created on day 2, how much time passed since the world was created, and what the world stands on. The Medrash continues, but we'll leave it for that. So this is what the Medrash says. Now, wie bald as die Meiles von Eden, was hat gerechnet, haben ihm gebracht zu wollen sich Megaier sein, since these qualities is what led him to want to convert. He's verstandig as is nicht Meiles in Gedel Chachma von Eden. He's not just describing the great wisdom of the Jewish people, nor Meiles as eine verbunden mit das Yisrael, qualities that connect to the faith of the Jewish people. He wanted to join the Jewish faith. So obviously he found here something that was important in Jewish faith. So what is so great about knowing in Emunah, in Das Yisrael, knowing exactly how many years passed since the world was created? Is the Bir Bazeh. The Emunah in Chidush Eilam is eine von die Yisedis von Torah. To believe that the world was created by Hashem, that the world is something new, that the Eibishter created, is one of the Zainah von the Yisedis von Torah, is one of the foundations, the fundamentals of Torah. V'lashnar Ramban, as the Ramban writes, Ki hu sheirish ha'emunah, this belief that the Eibishter created the world is the foundation, is the root of our emunah. If someone does not believe in this, one believes that the world is its own first, it came before anything else. Kaifer ba'ikar is denying in the most fundamental truth, the Ein Le Torah Kal, and has no Torah. So the idea that to believe that the Eibishter created the world, this is one of the fundamentals of the Jewish faith. In Emunah Gufas are never kamadagis, but there are various levels in Emunah. It's possible someone to have complete faith. Und doch fällt ihm die Klarkeit davon, but he lacks clarity. I believe Hashem created the world, but what that means exactly is blurry to me. The faith is not clear. For example, Chazal tell us you can't compare seeing something to hearing something. Even though he knows for sure that which he heard is true, he says, but it doesn't have the same authenticity as if he's seen it. So a person could have a munah because someone told him so. He heard it and he learned it and he believes it, but he hasn't seen it yet. He doesn't have a clarity in that as if he's seen it. And that's what's so great about the fact that Akilah saw that even a simpleton knows how many years existed, how many years passed since the world was created. The faith, including the root of this faith, the foundation of this faith, that we believe that the Eibishter created the world, is Ba'ima Yediyah Brura. When he knows how many years passed, then this whole knowledge that Hashem created the world becomes clear to him. It's a clear knowledge. He knows the exact time when Hashem created the world. So when you say, of course I believe Hashem created the world. When, how, what, I don't know. But when you say, I know that Hashem created the world 5,785 years ago. When you say, I look in Chumash and I see the exact time when Hashem created the world. I know, it tells you, it makes it much more real to you. And it's still a munah, but it's a munah with clarity. It's a munah that is authenticated because you know the years, you know the details. Like there's an expression in English, the devil is in the details. Here, if I care, the truth is in the details. Because you have the details, this makes this emunah so much more real. And this is why the Torah tells us all the numbers. So we should know exactly the numbers of the years of the world, because that makes our faith in Hashem and the fact that Hashem created the world so much more real and so much more authentic. So from the discussion about the how the Torah counts the ages, we come to the conclusion, based on this whole discussion, we come to the conclusion that the years are not exact of the person's age. Why? Because the ultimate goal is to know Shnois Olam, to know the years of the world, to know when things happened. So according to that, we have to understand what's so great about knowing when things happened. And the answer is to authenticate our emunah, to make our emunah more clear and more real. So the question that begins with why does Rashi not say anything about the glaring contradiction in Noach's age leads to an understanding that the way Torah lists numbers is there solely for the purpose to strengthen our emunah, to clarify our emunah in Hashem. And in the meantime, we enjoyed this incredible way of understanding the numbers as only the Rebbe can teach us.